Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We have a lot of basketball to cover today. There were a lot of really good finishes down the stretch, some really surprising results. Tyrese Maxey saved the Sixers season with a miraculous play down the stretch of that game to send it to overtime, and his performance in overtime outdueling Jalen Brunson keeps the Sixers alive as the series heads back to Philadelphia for Game 6. We'll break that game down first. In our second segment, we're going to break down the rest of the NBA games, including the Bucks' domination over the Indiana Pacers on a night where they didn't have either of their stars in Dame or Giannis. And the Cavs are able to hold on despite a lot of their same problems that they had in Orlando continuing to bite them in the butt for Game 5 at home. They take a 3-2 series lead as Game 6 is up next back in Orlando. We'll see if they can win a game on the road. In segment 3, we're going to talk about Mike Trout and his injury, talk about how that's going to affect the entirety of the MLB, how it kind of affects his career, what we're looking at as a whole with Mike Trout, because it's a shame he was finally getting back into form. And we're going to close off our show talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, and they are in a little bit of an interesting situation with some of their contracts. You know, T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson are both asking for trades. So they're both major pieces on both offense and defense, especially Trey Hendrickson, who has been a huge difference maker and one of the bigger reasons why the Bengals have been able to turn it around in recent years. He, if they do trade him, is going to fetch a pretty good price and is going to leave a massive void for the Bengals to have to fix in that defense. He is just very irreplaceable. Well, we'll talk about all of that stuff and more coming up in just a second, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message will pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else watching around the world to take a look at. Once again, all you need to do is leave a donation at the link on the screen. Currently, that is gsmcpodcast.net. We appreciate anything you do give, any of your contributions, and we appreciate all of you for sticking around and watching. But like I was saying, we're just going to start the show off with the big headline from last night. Tyrese Maxey. How about Tyrese Maxey? Tyrese Maxey comes in, elimination game for the Sixers in Madison Square Garden. You had all the stars out. You had a huge raucous crowd, and Tyrese Maxey steps up, drops a 40-point game to save the 76ers season. 46 points on really efficient shooting. He hit a logo three to send the game to overtime. Scores the last 7 points of the game in what seemed like the Sixers were done. A game that, right before that happened, the storyline was Jalen Brunson is clutch down the stretch, and Tyrese Maxey was able to overcome all that. He outduels Jalen Brunson. He really just at the end of the game, it was 1v1 back and forth between those two. He hits a tough 3 with a foul, makes that a 4-point play. They get a stop on they get a missed free throw. 1 out of 2 goes Josh Hart from the line to close the game, and Tyrese Maxey is able to hit a logo 3 at the end to send the game to overtime. And we're not just going to look at that. We're not going to overlook the impact defensively that Joel Embiid had. And Joel Embiid didn't play his best game. 9 turnovers isn't generally the kind of game that you look back on and say, wow, he was the reason they won. But Joel Embiid had a block on Jalen Brunson on what could potentially have been a buzzer beater in regulation, and descended overtime. And he also had a block down the stretch in overtime that could have sent the game to double overtime on Jalen Brunson. He was a force down there. He was able to really stop the Knicks, or at least stop Jalen Brunson when no one else was able to. Jalen Brunson still got his fair share. He was still putting up plenty of points in the overtime. If I'm not mistaken, and I don't have the splits in front of me, he scored at least half of the points that the entire Knicks team had in overtime. He was dominant in that overtime period. But there's a lot of things to point out if you are a Knicks fan. The Sixers got lucky. You can't count on Tyrese Maxey to hit a 4-point play and also a logo three every single night, in the last 15 seconds of the game. That's not something that, as a fan, you can really just sit there and say, yep, I feel comfortable waiting on my team because Tyrese Maxey is going to put up 46 points every night and he's going to, hit these insane shots. It was his night. He wasn't going to miss. When that shot went up, I knew it was going in because it was his night, It's not a shot you want to be counting on, though. It was a great playoff moment, but the Sixers, if they truly want to come back in this series, they need to be able to play a full game. They need to be able to have everybody show up, not just one guy. In both of the games that they have won so far in this series, it has been because either Joel Embiid or Tyrese Maxey go out and put on a show. They are better than everybody else on the floor. In Game 3, also kind of felt like an elimination game. You had Joel Embiid step up, and he put up 50 points. In Game 5, a true elimination game, Tyrese Maxey steps up, scores 46. They have these huge performances from their stars, and it's great that in these moments, their stars are stepping up. But if you are a Sixers fan, you can't tell me that you feel safer. It's always good to know that your guy can step up and make that play when you need him to make that play. But if you're counting on him and that's the only way that you're going to win is if one of your two stars puts up 50 points, it's not something you can rely on. You can't say, okay, one of you guys has to put up 50 tonight and we'll be good. I know it's an elimination game and there's some extra weight. And I know there's a lot that goes into it, but this was a really good game. This was a really fun game, especially down the stretch. Every overtime game is. It was back and forth. The Knicks started off real hot in overtime, but the Sixers were able to crawl back with Embiid's defense and with Tyrese Maxey on offense. Like I said, there was a lot of positives on both sides. Down the stretch on defense, OG Anunoby came up with a bunch of steals and tipped passes and made it really hard. And really, it was the whole Knicks defense that came up with a lot of big plays down the stretch to really, what seemed like at the time, put the game away. Mason McBride off the bench had a really good game. He had a couple really clutch shots, was moving around very well, finding open space on the floor. And Isaiah Hartenstein, really the thing that's been what we've seen in this series showed up again in the basketball game. Now, if you're looking at the box score and you're looking at rebounding numbers, the 76ers, they won the rebounding battle. But if you're looking at, but if you were watching the game, it felt like on a whole lot of possessions, the Knicks were just able to continue to crush the glass and get those huge rebounds to kind of seem like they were pulling away. Again, they never did. The Sixers were able to stay in the game, and with their high-end talent, were able to win this. But you can't count on that every single game. There were a lot of positives from both teams. Jalen Brunson had a huge game. He was incredible. He also puts up 40 points. He did put up 32 shots, so especially down the stretch, he was the entire offense. In overtime and down the stretch in the fourth quarter, it was all Jalen Brunson all day. That's what he was doing, and it was working. So you weren't gonna knock it, but Joel Embiid came up with a couple huge blocks down the stretch on Jalen Brunson. I already mentioned the one in regulation on what would have been an overtime buzzer-beating shot in regulation, and a huge block down the stretch in overtime to seal the deal. Joel Embiid, or I think it was Maxey, I forget who, Sixers hit free throws on the other end to extend it to a multiple possession lead, and that just about did the game. Free throw shots could have won this for the Knicks. Like I said, they went 1 for 2 at the line, left it open, which made, instead of a 4-point game, it was a 3-point game, which left it open for Tyrese Maxey to hit that logo 3 and send it to overtime. So this was definitely a winnable game for the Knicks. You might even go as far as to say the Knicks should have won this game. But Tyrese Maxey and a little bit of luck from the 76ers, they were able to pull ahead. I don't believe they're going to be able to win this series. This was way too tight in an elimination game where they were playing with everything, and also it's 3-1. You don't see many people come back from 3-1. So all of that combined, I don't see the Sixers coming back and winning this series, but it's a fun series. You see why people were excited for this. I still think the winner of this series is going to end up facing the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Final, which looks like the Knicks at this point. Maybe they can keep extending it. If it gets to a Game 7, anything can happen. But it's gonna be real tight. And I still think this Knicks team, just their defense, they're more composed. They're more consistent. That's the word I was looking for. They're more consistent in their basketball every single night, in and out. You kind of know what you expect. With the Sixers, it's a little more volatile, and you don't know what you're getting. So at the end of the day, I'm going with that team that's more consistent and is going to be able to give you a good night every single night. But it's still a good series. There's still 2 games left. It's 3-2. Anything can happen, especially when you have this high-end talent on the 76ers like Joel Embiid, like Tyrese Maxey, who can show up and drop 50 on any given night. So looking forward to the rest of that series. I'm taking the Knicks the rest of the way, but anything can happen, like I said. In our next segment, we are going to break down the rest of the NBA action from last night, including a dominating win by the Milwaukee Bucks in a game without Dame or Giannis. A game that they had to win to save their season. Shocking results all around the NBA. We'll break down the other 2 games from last night and maybe preview tonight's game if we have time. Stick around. We'll be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.